and love, why then a good night, Germany. By the lamplight glow in the evening, sits a mother old and gray, silently knitting with fingers washed for her boy to play. Her heart is heavy with sorrow, and her brow all wrinkled with care. With every stitch satisfaction, she breathes a gentle prayer. Each stitch is a thought of you, dear, woven with loving care. I'm knitting my heart in each garment, dear, to send to you somewhere. My hands are old and worn, dear, the stitches may not be true. But there's love in each one, a mother's love for her son. Each stitch is a thought of you.
Here's the scarf for Jimmy of Glen, and a cap for Bobby dear. A prayer, God keep them safe from all harm, and forgive a mother's fear. I've knitted your baby's stocking, and I'm proud to do it again. Although the cradle stops rocking, for my poor big brave men.
Each stitch is a thought of you, dear, woven with loving care. I'm knitting my heart in each garment, dear, to send to you somewhere. My hands are old and worn, dear, the stitches may not be true. But there's love in each one, a mother's love for her son. Each stitch is a thought of you.
America, the world is calling you. America, it needs you badly too. For the nations all of thee cry out for liberty. The stars and stripes can save and make them free. The sound of arms of Sam can win the fray. And here's the man that has to save the day. It's the man behind the hammer and the plow who made this country what it is today. It's the man behind the hammer and the plow, the gift of God's creation, the builders of the nation, mechanic and the engineer, all honest sons of toil, the backbone of the world today, the man who kills the toil. It's up to him to win the battle now, the man behind the hammer and the plow. America, we know you'll do what's right. America, you've never lost a fight. You're bound to do your share and do it on the square. And when there's peace, at least you will be there. Now, working man, today you have the power to win pardon to Sam. This is your hour. It's the man behind the hammer and the plow who made this country what it is today. It's the man behind the hammer and the plow, the gift of God's creation, the builders of the nation, mechanic and the engineer, all honest sons of toil, the backbone of the world today, the man who tills the soil. It's up to him to win the battle now, the man behind the hammer and the plow. It's the man behind the hammer and the plow who made this country what it is today. It's the man behind the hammer and the plow, the gift of God's creation, the builders of the nation, mechanic and the engineer, all honest sons of toil, the backbone of the world today, the man who tills the soil. It's up to him to win the battle now, the man behind the hammer and the plow.
song, The Americans Come, depicts an episode in France in the year 1917, immediately following the arrival of the first contingent of khaki-clad American boys. A blinded French soldier speaks to his son.
What is the cheering, my little one? Oh, that my blinded eyes could see. Hasten, my boy, to the window run, and see what the noise in the street may be. I hear the drums and the marching feet. Look and see what it's all about. Who can it be that our people treat with cheer and laughter and joyous shout? There are men, my father, brown and strong, and they carry a banner of wondrous hue. With a mighty tread they swing along. Now I see white stars on a field of blue. You say that you see white stars on blue. Look, are there stripes of red and white? It must be, yes, it must be true. Oh, dear God, if I had my sight. Hasten, son, fling the window wide. Let me kiss the staff our flag swings from, and salute the stars and stripes with pride. For God be praised, the Americans Goodbye, New York town, goodbye, Miss Liberty. Your light of freedom will guide us across the sea. Every soldier's sweetheart bidding goodbye. Every soldier's mother drying her eye. Cheer up, we'll soon be there, singing the Yankee air. Goodbye, Broadway, hello, friend. We're 10 million strong. Goodbye, sweetheart, white and colored. It won't take us long. Don't you worry while we're there. It's for you we're fighting too. So goodbye, Broadway, hello, friend. We're going to pay our debt to you. Right. Left. Hey, don't you worry while we're there. It's for you we're fighting too. So goodbye, Broadway, hello, friend. We're going to pay our debt to you. Fighting is the cry across the sea. We're united in this fight for liberty. France sent us a soldier, brave Lafayette, whose deeds and fame we cannot forget. Now that we have the chance, we'll pay our debt to France. Goodbye, Broadway. million strong. Goodbye, sweetheart, wife and mother. It won't take us long. Don't you worry while we're there. It's for you we're fighting too. So goodbye, Broadway, hello, friends. We're going to pay our debts to you. Don't you worry while we're there. It's for you we're fighting through. So goodbye, Broadway, hello, friends. We're going to pay our debts to you. Grand old coffee, hale and hearty, hats off to him today. Yankee, yes sir, home address sir, Washington, USA. His face is familiar to you and to me, but some folks are across the sea. If to forget how he looks, you're inclined, just paint this picture in your mind. He's long and lean and lanky, and his locks are like the snow. But he's just as young a Yankee as 100 years ago. We're his 100 million nephews, proud to call him Uncle Sam. And we'll go to the mat at the drop of the hat for that grand old gentleman. He's long and lean and lanky, and his locks are like the snow. But he's just as young a Yankee as 100 years ago. We're his 100 million nephews, proud to call him Uncle Sam. And we'll go to the mat at the drop of the hat for that grand old gentleman. Easy going, no bluff throwing, minding his P's and Q's. Likes to fight, sir? No, not quite, sir. Just too proud to refuse. He's taking a trip for his health for the sea. Last time I heard from him, said he, I'm doing fine, all the family's well. Yours truly, Uncle Samuel. He's long and lean and lanky, and his locks are like the snow. But he's just as young a Yankee as 100 years ago. With his 100 million nephews, proud to call him Uncle Sam. And we'll go to the mat and the drop of the hat for that grand old gentleman. He's long and lean and lanky, and his locks are like the snow. But he's just as young a Yankee as 100 years ago. We're his 100 million nephews, proud to call him Uncle Sam. And we'll go to the mat at the drop of the hat for that grand old gentleman.
Listen to the war drum beat, the bugle call, the tramp of feet.
Sailors brave have stood the test. A call to arms has just resulted. Poor old glory's been insulted. War is gnawing at the breast. As the fighters march away, a Yankee lad is heard to say,
Daddy, Daddy, I want to go. I want to fight our country's foes. I'm tired of playing soldier with the boys, whose only pleasure is to play with toys. Daddy, Daddy, I want to fight. Just bet your boots with all my might. I'll be Johnny on the spot, firing out the winning shot. Now, Daddy, I want to go.
Daddy, Daddy, I want to go. I want to fight our country's foe. I'm tired of playing soldier with the boys, whose only pleasure is to play with toys. Daddy, Daddy, I want to fight. Just bend your boots with all my might. I'll be Johnny on the spot, firing out the winning shot. Now, Daddy, I want to go. Years have gone, now Daddy's old. Cannon tops have long been cold. Round the call for volunteers. Age prevents him from enlisting, but his heart keeps on insisting that his meeting is the cheer. As his lad joins the men, we can hear that plea again.
Daddy, Daddy, I want to go. I want to fight our country's foes. Playing soldier with the boys, whose only pleasure is to play with toys. Daddy, Daddy, I want to fight. Just bet your boots with all my might. I'll be Johnny on the spot, firing out the winning shot. Now, Daddy, I want to go.
Daddy, Daddy, I want to go. I want to fight our country's foe. I'm tired of playing soldier with the boys, to play with toys. Daddy, Daddy, I want to fight. Just bend your boots with all my might. I'll be Johnny on the spot, firing out the winning shot. Now, Daddy, I want to go.
Jolly bunch of stars are we love to sail the deep blue sea and sing so merrily. So merrily. A sailor's life is so full of joy, and all the girls are sailor boys. That's why, the reason why we love to sail the deep blue sea.
All's well, all's well.
Oh, Captain, is the transport in the danger zone yet?
Yes, but while it's more dangerous right here, there's danger everywhere on the sea. But don't worry, you Red Cross girls would be the first to be taken care of.
Oh, we're not worrying any more than the boys are.
We're on our way across the foam to fight for those we left at home, sweet home. Are we downhearted? No, no, no. We're doggone glad that we can go. Hey, that's a pretty good song, but I can sing a better one.
Who are you?
My name's Hickey Hank, and I used to sing soprano in our village choir.
Well, go ahead and show the boys up, Hank.
Well, I'll be darned if I don't. I'm Hickey Hank.
He's Hickey Hank.
I'm Hickey Hank.
He's Hickey Hank.
I'm glad I left the farm to be an A1 fighting man. I'll come back someday in a captain's cap, and I'll take my best gal on my lap. Lots of kisses, make a missus. I'm Hickey Hank, by heck.
You're all right, Hank.
Some singer.
What does he do aboard?
Who, Hank? Why, he's a gunner.
Periscope, dead ahead.
Pipe all hands to quarters.
A torpedo, Captain, on the starboard bow.
Take a zigzag course. Full speed ahead.
Aye, aye, sir.
Right over he missed us by 20 feet.
When you get the range, fire.
Aye, aye, sir.
A little short. Try again. Fire yet.
The U-boat's gone under. We must have hit her. She's coming up astern.
Fire! A direct hit.
She's blown to pieces.
Where's the man that fired that shot?
Here I be, Captain. I'm the feller, Hickey Hank from old Yap Hank.
Good
boy. Yes, indeed, some boy.
We're
On our way across the foam to fight for those we left at home, sweet home. Are we downhearted? No, no, no. We're doggone glad that we can go. A jolly bunch of stars are we. We love to sail the deep blue sea and sing so merrily. So merrily. A sailor's life is so full of joy, and all the girls are sailor boys. That's why, the reason why we love to sail the deep blue sea.
Everyone wants a little sunshine, and we can make it come to stay. If we all help at one time, we'll drive the clouds away.
Mother was smiling, though there was longing for those who are away.
I know of one who wrote to her son, hear what he had to say. I'm over here comfort me so. You'll always be my baby to me. In dreams I seem to see you back on my knee.
You know the victory must be won, and it's up to you, my son.
We'll do our share while you're there. Speak to the boy who gets the letter. He starts to read, my darling boy. Then he feels so much better. His heart just fills with joy.
Knowing his mother doesn't worry, knowing we're with him too.
By candlelight he reads every night her letter through and through. I'm over here, you're there, and every night I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot be there, I say this prayer. Oh, I cannot
song, The Americans Come, depicts an episode in France in the year 1917, immediately following the arrival of the first contingent of khaki-clad American boys. Blinded French soldier speaks to his son.
What is the cheering, my little one? Oh, that my blinded eyes could see. Hasten my boy to the window, run in the street, maybe. I hear the drums and the marching feet. Look and see what it's all about. Who can it be that our people free with cheer and laughter and joyous shout? There are men, my father, brown and strong, and they carry a banner of wondrous hue. With a mighty tread they swing along. Now I see white stars on a field of blue. You say that you see white stars on blue. Look, are there stripes of red and white? It must be, yes, it must be true. Oh, dear God, if I had my sight. Hasten, unfling the window wide. Let me kiss the staff our flag swings from, and salute the stars and stripes with pride. For God be praised, the Americans come. Goodbye, New York town, goodbye, Miss Liberty. Your light of freedom will guide us across the sea. Every soldier's sweetheart bidding goodbye. Every soldier's lover crying hurrah. Cheer up, we'll soon be there, singing the Yankee air. Goodbye, Broadway, hello, friend. We're 10 million strong. Goodbye, sweetheart, wife and mother. It won't take us long. Don't you worry while we're there. It's for you we're fighting soon. So goodbye, Broadway, hello, friend. We're going to pay our debt to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program is about to begin. Thank you.
Right. Left. Don't you worry. Goodbye, Broadway, hello. Be fighting is the cry across the sea. We're united in this fight for liberty. France sent us a soldier, brave Lafayette, whose deeds and fame we cannot forget. Now that we have the chance, we'll pay our debt to France. Good Broadway, hello. Goodbye, sweetheart, wife and mother. It won't take us long. Don't you worry while we're there. It's for you we're fighting too. So goodbye, Broadway, hello, France. We're going to pay our debt to you.
For everyone in the back, feel free to take your seat. Good afternoon, and thanks for being here. My name is Hope Seck. I'm the managing editor of military.com, and I'm here with a little co-host today. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to Women in Wartime, tribute to the women of World War I. World War I marked a great many firsts for women. It was the first time women were officially members of the military in a capacity other than nurses. The Army Signal Corps recruited women to serve as bilingual telephone operators, sometimes known as Hello Girls, to help run vital military communications in Europe. The Navy recruited women to serve as yeomen to perform mostly clerical duties across the country in naval stations, shipyards, hospitals, and munitions factories. Women also served in the Marine Corps, performing clerical duties such as accounting, recruiting, and stenography. Their efforts and contributions in the Great War left a lasting legacy that inspired change across the nation. We are here today because there's no National World War I Memorial in Washington, D.C., to honor the women and the men who served our nation over 100 years ago. In a moment, we will welcome Deborah Anderson, one of the commissioners of the World War I Centennial Commission. But first, to understand what brought us all here today, you need to understand the force behind this memorial. The commission was created by an act of Congress in 2013. The 12-member commission, many of whom are here with us today, were appointed by the presidents and leaders of the Senate and House of Representatives, as well as the American Legion, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, and National World War I Museum. And as further evidence of its significance, all 4 living former presidents have agreed to serve the commission as honorary chairmen. This commission and their staff, led by Executive Director Dan Dayton and Deputy Director Meredith Carr, have worked tirelessly to put this event together, to bring you all here today at the site of the future National World War I Memorial. To tell you more about the commission and the memorial, it is my pleasure to introduce Commissioner Deborah Anderson. Not only does Deborah currently serve as the Quartermaster General of the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the nation's largest and oldest major war veterans organization. She was the very first woman ever elected to this position. Deborah served in the Army as an officer for 13 years, including a deployment with the 1st Infantry Division to Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Kuwait during the First Gulf War. She has been awarded the Bronze Star Medal, 2 Meritorious Service Medals, the Southeast Asia Service Medal, the Kuwait Liberation Medal, and the Parachutist Badge. Please help me to welcome Commissioner Deborah Anderson.
Good afternoon. My name is Deborah Anderson, and I'm honored to be a commissioner on the National World War I Centennial Commission. And as you just heard, I was appointed by the Veterans of Foreign Wars. We've got commissioners that represent the American Legion, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, and the National World War I Museum. And it's really important that, that we be part of this commission because we do represent veterans of this country, and this memorial is so important to those veterans. I'm here to welcome you to the site of the future National World War I Memorial, just 1 century overdue. War is not just about battles, campaigns, nations. War is really about people, and that's what memorials are about, is about people. 100 years ago, 4.7 million Americans, sons, daughters, fathers, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, went off to fight a war that did change the world. This war marked the beginning of the American century, the civil rights movement, and women's fight for the right to vote. This war killed 19 million people and left 23 million wounded. And here in America, 116,516 Americans paid the ultimate sacrifice. In a war that until now was mostly forgotten. Mostly forgotten. Here in our nation's capital, we have memorials to Vietnam, to Korea, and to World War II. But there is no national memorial to those who served in World War I here in our nation's capital. But now, right here in this park, there will be a memorial for them. Being on this commission has been an incredible learning experience for me. I was one of those people who really didn't know much about the war. I didn't know what it was about or who fought or what people did. And I've learned so much being a part of this commission and just watching what happens and going to the events. I've learned about the Great War and about some of the incredible people who served, to include learning about women and their role in the war, who were telephone operators, nurses, Red Cross workers, and other military service members and supporters. Those of us who have served since then stand on their shoulders. We were able to do what we did because these women proved their worth, proved what they could do, showed their grit, and served proudly and bravely. And we are indebted to them and to each generation of women in service who followed them for paving the way. It's phenomenal to look at the last 100 years and what women have been able to achieve and able to do in the military. So thank you for being here, for taking the time to learn more about this war and to learn more about those who served. I am honored to be with this group on the stage today of distinguished women, many of them first in their roles. I know this will be a great program, and I thank you for supporting this memorial for those who served, for all who served in World War I, need to be rightly remembered and honored. Thank you.
This is a really exciting lineup for me. These are people here on the stage, for the most part, that I've covered in my military career, as far as in my career as a military journalist. I can't think of anyone better suited to offer today's invocation than our next speaker. She joined the Navy in 1986 and retired just this year. Not only was she the 26th Chief of Chaplains for the Navy, but she was the first of all time female Chief of Chaplains for the Navy. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce Rear Admiral Margaret Kibben.
A very good afternoon to all of you. Would you pray with me? Gracious God, we give you thanks for this opportunity to gather together to celebrate the rich centenary of history of women who stepped up bravely in service to this country and in defense of justice and freedom across the globe. As women like Navy Chief Yeoman Loretta Walsh, Marine Private Opha May Johnson, Coast Guard Yeomanettes Genevieve and Lucille Baker, Army nurses like Edith Ayers and Helen Wood, and thousands of others are honored today for their groundbreaking service in uniform. We ask that you would remind us that the cloth of our nation has been woven also by the hands of those who spent countless hours volunteering for the Red Cross, the YMCA, and the Salvation Army. Cause us to remember, too, that our country's fabric has been made strong by the thousands of women who sustained industry, stepping up to staff vacated offices and overwhelmed factories. And here, then, our gratitude for those women who also served, who only stood and waited, managing households, raising the next generation while war ravaged their families and stole away their husbands, their sons, and their brothers. Gracious God, as we recognize and celebrate the countless sacrifices women made over a century ago, we give you thanks for their examples of courage and strength, bravery and fortitude, meekness and humility. Keep us ever mindful that because they held up their end and pulled for victory, that all of us stand here today beneficiaries of their insistence that one's genuineness and not one's gender is the essential criteria for service to our country. We ask now that our tribute to these heroes serves as an inspiration and a reminder that you have graced each of us with a purpose that we are called to accomplish. Keep us ever focused on the cause for peace in our service to you and to our country. It is in the strength of your name we pray. Amen.
The American Legion came about because several veterans from World War I came home enriched with wonderful ties of friendship and gave those ties meaning by dedicating them to the idea of mutual helpfulness. Our next speaker knows well the values of the American Legion. Denise Rohan joined the Army in 1974, and in 2017, she was elected National Commander of the American Legion, the very first woman to hold this position in an organization with more than 2 million members. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce Denise Rohan.
Thank you so much. Commissioners, honored guests, veterans, I am so happy to have this opportunity to be with you today. Now, as I was listening to the election results Tuesday night into yesterday, I heard about a lot of firsts. The first woman governor to be elected, the first female county sheriff, or the first female veteran to be elected in this state or that state. And then as I look at these distinguished members on the stage today and in the audience as part of the program, I see names like Brigadier General Wilma Bott, the first woman to deploy with an Air Force bomber unit and the first woman to reach the rank of Brigadier General from the controller field. Admiral Howard, the first woman to become a 4-star general, or admiral, sorry. Lieutenant Commander Jenkins, the first Jewish woman to command the U.S. naval warship. Rhonda Amtower, who served as the first female Marine attaché to the U.S. consulate in Hong Kong. Margaret Kibbens, the Presbyterian minister who had Mary first in her rights. The Commissioner Anderson, Captain Cunningham, Sergeant First Class Joyner, each having your own first for yourselves. Earlier this week, I was reading about Staff Sergeant Amanda Kelly, the first U.S. Army enlisted woman to earn a Ranger tab at Fort Benning. It makes me stop and wonder about the first steps along each of your journeys as you did your distinction service as the first in your fields. Now, when I was in high school, I too could have cared less about history. I didn't think it was really relevant to me, so I got by on extra credit work. But over the last several years, I've had the opportunity to meet some of the amazing men and women who made history while serving in uniform. And as I reflect on my history lessons, I've come to realize that the first steps in our current day Sheroes journey was taken over 100 years ago by other trailblazing women. Women like Loretta Walsh, who in 1917 became the first woman to enlist in the military as a woman. Opha May Johnson, who was the first woman to enlist in the U.S. Marine Corps in 1918. And the newspaper at the time read, "Girl joined the Devil Dogs." The approximately 21,000 women who rolled up their sleeves to be Army nurses. Or how about those 223 women known as the Hello Girls who served as switchboard operators for the U.S. Signal Corps? And then there were still other women who served as our nation's first yeomen, or yeowomen, in the Navy. I learned about Edith Ayres and Helen Wood, who became the first female members of the U.S. military killed in the line of duty in May of 1917, while serving as Army nurses with Base Hospital Number 12 aboard the USS Mongolia en route to France. The women who served in uniform during the Great War served with dignity and honor. Many of these women saw it as a way to earn citizenship, full citizenship. All of these women, right up to those in uniform today, saw a need. They saw a need and they stepped up to volunteer. None of them were required to serve. They put on the uniform because someone taught them that being an American meant that you give back to your nation in some way. A seed of patriotism had been planted inside their hearts. Even the women who did not put on uniforms during the Great War had their lives affected in some way. Women were left at home alone, as they said goodbye to their husbands, their sons, and their daughters as they went off to fight. We had the World War I We Can Do It women who took on traditional male roles of welding and making machines of war, not to mention the dangerous job in ammunition plants. Families were growing victory gardens and collecting scrap metal for the war effort. That was a generation who really understood what recycling was all about. And history reveals that these women, those who served in uniform and those who worked outside of their homes, helped expedite the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920, as their male counterparts began to see females as equals, and those men elected to give women the right to vote. Step by step, these women helped lead the way to the 1948 law, which made women a permanent part of the military services. And step by step, all of the servicewomen who came before helped set the foundation for the Defense Secretary to open combat jobs to women. These seemingly ordinary women who wore the uniform did some extraordinary work. They were all cut from cross-sections of our nation, and they represented the very best that our country has to offer. Now we can be thankful. We can be thankful that we're a nation that does not forget. And its memorials, like the one that's being built here and those around our nation, those memorials will help us remember to tell our children and our children's children about the men and the women who have served throughout our history to preserve our way of life. This memorial reminds us that generations of Americans have put themselves in harm's way for humanity's sake. They served not only to preserve our nation's values, but also so the ideals of freedom and liberty could be extended to all nations of the world. The essence of their sacrifice resides in the spirit of freedom-loving people everywhere. Today, we celebrate not only the past, but recognize the selfless service and sacrifice of our present-day heroes. Today, around the world, our men and women in uniform stand guard, guaranteeing and protecting liberty. In young people like this, we see great hope for our future, because no matter what needs to be done, there will always be patriotic Americans who value their freedom and their country so much that they will step forward unafraid of any challenge they may have to face to keep the peace or to put down aggression anywhere there is a need. And as we gaze at these wonderful structures, don't forget to give thought to their families and the friends of these heroes who we are honoring. The measure and the depth of their sacrifice is sometimes hard to comprehend, but we must never forget their part in our history. Those individuals who kept and are keeping the home fires burning. Today, the veterans who are here, I ask you to please share your stories. No matter how small a piece of history you may think you have served, please share your stories. Your page in history may just be enough to get a high school student to turn the page and read the next chapter about our nation's history. They will learn. They will learn how you put your lives on hold and you made sacrifices for them, to give them the life that they are able to lead. Today, we pray for God's protection for our current day heroes. All are serving with honor, doing their duties, not failing their comrades or their country. It is our responsibility to make sure that when they do come home, we do not fail them. We need to make sure that they're treated with honor and respect, and that they receive the care and the benefits that they deserve. Please, care enough to be there. Honor them always. And may we always remember November 11th, 1918, 100 years ago, as a day when the world hoped, albeit for a brief moment, that perhaps we had just fought the war to end all wars. I thank you for being here today to help honor the sheroes of World War I. To my fellow veterans, thank you for your service and your sacrifice for this country. God bless our troops, our veterans, and God bless this great nation. Thank you.
Thank you to Denise Rohan for that really beautiful and passionate message. So now we have a very special treat for you, a new film created by the World War I Centennial Commission that tells the story of a soldier and all the soldiers and their families who will be honored by the memorial that will take its rightful place right where we are here today. A Soldier's Journey is the classic, timeless narrative of a hero's journey found in all cultures globally. The Soldier's Journey is a story of family, of nation, and of an epic mythology. The father departs from the arms of his family, enters into the brutality of battle, leaves death and madness transformed, finally returning home forever changed. It is a story of a soldier's journey, and it is a story of the creation of the memorial.
When my husband Jack was a little boy, he used to go out with his grandfather, and Jack was always just surprised at the number of people who would follow them down the street with cameras or just pieces of paper asking the general to please sign an autograph. No one remembers. Some of the older people I've met say, General Pershing? That name sounds familiar. Or, oh, there's a Pershing Street in my town. But they have no idea.
Come back here. Where are you going? You didn't give me command.
When I was a kid, we would watch the movie, and everybody always wanted to be my grandfather. I'm like, well, no, I need to be my grandfather, you know?
I got a box back of some family pictures, and in the bottom of the box was this picture. And it was of my grandfather in a military uniform. And so I began to get interested and actually passionate about World War I and the history and what it meant, not just for me and my family, but what it meant for the community as a whole.
World War I was the war that changed the world. It changed everything about the interrelationship between countries. It helped to advance our technology. It helped to advance the rights of women. It helped to advance the rights of African Americans. It helped bring America out of its shell for the first time. There is an importance to the American dream. There is an importance to the defense of the democracy of the United States. That's just as important today as it was 100 years ago, as it was 200 plus years ago. We're charged with trying to help Americans understand that and to build a national memorial when there is no World War I memorial in the nation's capital. We're going to build one.
I was given the task of creating a national World War I memorial for Washington. I think what really drove me to get involved in this project was that I realized after looking at imagery of what World War I looked like, I was struck by how young the soldiers and the women and the children were that were affected by this war. And there's a lot of expression in those pictures. To do this memorial, I took 12,000 pictures with the models wearing uniforms from 100 years ago. And from those 12,000 pictures, I created 9 different iterations that I showed to the Centennial Commission in Washington. I didn't shoot the photographs straight on. I lowered my eye level to about mid-knee. Shooting slightly below gave the figures a sense of monumentality and heroism. So I could create something through my drawings that was heroic, but here's the trick. It's also intimate at the same time, and it's about human beings. So it's accessible. As we proceeded through the process, we finally arrived at a soldier's journey.
My grandfather's name was Thomas Davie. He was a sergeant in the American Expeditionary Forces. My grandfather went off to fight for an ideal. He didn't fight for what he was experiencing in his life. He couldn't vote. He couldn't sit on the front of the bus, but he was prepared to go off and fight for democracy and the ideals that built this country and that he invested in. He was prepared to give his life. And that, is, to me, is the definition of patriotism. I mean, you don't get any more profound definition of patriotism than somebody who will fight for an idea, even in spite of the realities of their current circumstance. And he and 300,000 other African Americans did just that.
This memorial is about the process of being human. It's not the glorification of war. So what I did is I created something that everybody would understand. The initial scene begins with the father being handed the helmet by his daughter. The wife stands behind the father, and in the next scene, she holds his arm, asking him not to go as he breaks into this other group, the Brotherhood of Arms.
My grandfather was Sergeant Alvin C. York. It was not until the 5th grade, when I was called up to read something out of an encyclopedia, that I really understood that he was nationally known and known by more people than just our family. My grandfather really didn't want to go to war. If you ever see his draft card, it says, "Don't want to fight." He ended up getting drafted, and he told him, "I've made my peace. I haven't worked out about killing people, but I do want to go support my country."
There's an X built into the geometry and structure of the composition. It begins in this kinetic scene of the battle scene, driving down into the ground, into the cost of war, which is this Pietà figure right here. And rising up from that void, you have this diagonal that is the other side of the X. That other side of the X lands on the PTSD soldier that represents America emerging from World War I, as well as the father transformed from the battle that he has just left.
The battle was on October the 8th, 1918, beside a little village called Châtel-Chéry in France. There was heavy machine gun fire, and he saw his friends being killed. Every time the Germans would raise their head to shoot, he would touch them off. There was a German officer he had captured earlier, said, "If you will stop killing my people, I'll make the rest of them surrender." Now at this point, he had already killed 20 or 23 of them. He didn't want to kill anymore. He had 132 prisoners. And so as they marched back through the lines, he asked the German officer, "Which way would you go? We need to get back to the American lines." And the German officer said, "I'd go this way." My grandfather said, "Okay, we're going this way then." My grandfather, when he came back, was offered about $250,000 in 1919 money to endorse various things. And he said, "I did what I had to do to save my comrades." And so, no, the uniform's not for sale.
That was just such an altruistic group of people, and everybody went, and they all managed to get along, and they saved each other's lives, and they made it work.
This X continues up to the high point on the relief, which is the flag. And below the flag stands a soldier that looks back to what has been, and he is intertwined with two other soldiers that proceed forward. I hope that young Americans, when they...
Again, when you talk about diversity being strength, women came out of the home for the first time to be able to participate in the war. African Americans came out of the fields in many cases. Native Americans, in that point, then run off into reservations. Immigrant Americans, they all came together and participated as soldiers, as doughboys in World War I. And the rest of the world was very grateful.
The flag bearer is the Johnny Come Marching Home scene and represents the newfound power of America, leaving behind the agrarian nation and the isolationist way of perceiving itself in the world. The following scene and the final scene is the father. He's returned home to hand his daughter. She represents the next generation, World War II.
The things he's left me and the things of his that my grandmother gave me after he passed away really means a lot. It keeps me connected to him. He spoke to the 82nd All-American Division as they were reactivated for World War II. We fought the war, we thought we had won the peace, but what we found out was on our freedom. And now there's another payment coming due that we're going to have to pay up again. You have to make continual installments on it to keep the peace and keep freedom.
There were 4.7 million American families sent their sons and daughters off to fight this war. World War I killed more Americans than Vietnam and Korea combined. 116,516. More than 200,000 wounded. This commission is committed to memorializing those Americans who stepped in and helped stop the killing of millions and millions of human beings around the world.
He was asked later in life, what do you want to be remembered for? Your actions in France, being awarded the Medal of Honor, meeting the president. And he said, I want my legacy to be that I brought education to rural Tennessee.
The African American soldiers came back from Europe at the end of the war in 1918, and they brought back a different sensibility. There are many people who say that it was their intervention or their experiences that planted the seeds for the civil rights movement that blossomed, 60 years later. They so believed in the ideals of democracy.
I feel very proud that Sabin has captured the feeling of 1917-18 for the American public, because there's nothing like this. The general had every camera in the world on him, and so did some of his aides, like General Patton, MacArthur. These people, many of whom didn't even make it home, have had almost no recognition for what they did. And this war represented all of us in the States.
This is a war that transformed the world. It transformed me as an artist. I'm hoping that the person that comes to the memorial will be transformed as well and begin to care a little bit more about the planet and the direction that we head in.
It's a little dusty in here. Wow. So that incredible maquette that you saw in the film that sculptor Sabin Howard references can be seen in the First Look Pavilion, which is just behind us, close to 15th Street. So I encourage everyone after this event is over to visit that First Look Pavilion and to view the maquette and to learn all about the detail in the design of the memorial and also how you can contribute to its creation. Today we are fortunate to have with us some amazing women with many firsts in their careers. The next speaker's 35-year naval career is marked by several very significant firsts. Admiral Michelle Howard was the first woman to become a 4-star admiral in the Navy, the first female to command operational forces, the first African-American woman to achieve 2-star admiral rank, and the first female graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy promoted to flag officer. Her leadership and her legacy make her the perfect person to provide us some important perspective on the women of World War I.
In Flanders fields, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row. So starts the popular poem from World War I. In May 1915, Canadian doctor John McCrae had lost his friend to an artillery shell. Colonel McCrae substituted in the absence of a chaplain at his friend's memorial. It is said he wrote the short poem in Flanders fields in just a few hours, the morning after the memorial service. Some have commented about the act of writing something so powerful in such a short time frame. I marvel that someone in combat found a few hours of peace and was able to focus and write. I think about those poppies blooming between the crosses. They had to be staring hard at Dr. McCrae. He probably had to turn his back on them, I'm sure, just to carve out the steadiness of mind to honor his friend with a few words. The poppies of his poem came to represent the war itself and all who were lost. Countries around the world have used the poppy as a symbol of remembrance during the 100 Novembers since the Great War. And we frequently think of World War I in terms of the casualties and the awful death. In this country, it meant the mobilization of over 4 million military men, and of those, over 116,000 would die for the idea of liberty and the idea that liberty is the right of all citizens. These men were brave, and they gave their all. But today I want to talk about other brave participants, others who served with courage and ardor, the women of World War I. If the men are the poppies of McCrae's poem, the women have their metaphor as well. The larks, the birds, who witness the war because they are a part of the battlefield. McCrae wrote, "The larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below." The women of World War I, so many of them bravely singing, but the guns of the war were so loud, so present, we can scarce hear the echo of their voices today. These women, they were there in the war, on the battlefront, in field hospitals. These women, they were there in the war, clerks, radio operators, and translators for the military. These women, they were there in the war. There are estimates of 5,000 women volunteers across Europe trying to serve in any capacity that was allowed, and being women in a couple of cases in capacities they chose even if it wasn't allowed. The first voice scarcely heard in this country was Congresswoman Jeanette Rankin. She was elected to the House of Representatives from the state of Montana in 1916, an extraordinary political feat, as women didn't achieve the right to vote till 1920. Congresswoman Rankin was not only a suffragette, but a lifelong pacifist. Shortly after taking her seat, President Woodrow Wilson asked the Congress to declare war on Germany in response to Germany's declaration of unrestricted warfare on Atlantic shipping. Congresswoman Rankin cast one of the 50 House votes in opposition. She said, "I wish to stand for my country, but I cannot vote for war." She was singled out and criticized for her stance. I admire her strength of character to hold true to her beliefs. But she is just one woman whose voice comes faintly to us from the past. In the U.S. military, the recognition of the value of women in medicine occurred as the 18th century turned to the 19th century. The Army adopted a nurse auxiliary corps in 1901. They were paid less than the men. They had no military rank. They were not reserves or enlisted. They had no retirement plan or benefits. Despite these inequalities, the passion to help others was enough purpose for the women to join the Army, and the Navy started their own nurse corps in 1908. By the time the United States joined the Great War, the nurses' numbers were small, 400 in the Army and around 160 in the Navy. And by the war's end, over 22,000 nurses would serve, their work important and necessary, but scarce remembered as the century of guns have been loud. These nurses, like the larks, were bravely singing. They not only cared for the wounded, but had a far more lethal enemy to face than the soldiers on the battlefield. influenza. From the National Archives, it's estimated World War I claimed around 16 million lives. The influenza epidemic that swept the world in 1980 killed an estimated 50 million people. Within months, it killed more people than any other illness in recorded history. And during the epidemic, at least 10 U.S. Navy nurses died as a result of aiding the afflicted, and 3 of them would be awarded a posthumous Navy Cross. Of the 38 Army nurses who remained buried overseas, most of them perished from the flu. The larks that remain unknown are the women who bravely sung here at home. The war effort had taken away most of the doctors. It remained for the women to take care of their families and take care of the ill. This virus was different. Young adults, not normally impacted by these types of infectious diseases, were among the hardest hit, along with the elderly and young children. The flu affected over 25% of the U.S. population, and as a result, the average life expectancy in the United States dropped by 12 years. As some women tended hearth and home, others supported the war effort more directly. Once the guns of August were sounded, the Secretary of the Navy, Josephus Daniels, knew that the war would come and that America would have to get involved. As the battle for the control of the Atlantic waged between the United Kingdom and Germany, the Secretary knew he would need more ships and more men, and he wanted to free up every male sailor for the fight. He turned to his legal counsel and asked, "Is there any law that says a yeoman must be a man?" It was a smart question. The Secretary had to know that women had proven themselves in the American workplace. The feminization of the business world had started with the late 1800s. When Philo Remington invented his typewriter in 1873, he hired women to demonstrate the new invention, and women dominated communications. Bell Telephone, just after the turn of the century, had over 37,000 women on the switchboards as compared to 2,500 men. The Secretary of the Navy recognized this little tap talent, women, could ably manage the clerical duties for the Navy while he put male sailors to sea. And to his satisfaction, the law was ambiguous to the gender of sailors. A new kind of reservist, the yeoman female, yeoman F for short, was created in March of 1917. And the yeomanettes, as they were nicknamed, served with pride. They took over administrative duties, and as the war continued, contributed to a myriad of non-combat missions, from camouflage design to recruiting. So much for the slogan, "Gee, if I was a man, I'd join the Navy." The yeomanettes could tell potential sailors, "I'm a woman, and I serve, and so can you." By the war's end, over 11,000 yeomanettes had bravely sung their songs. And as I think of these larks and wonder why their voices are so distant as compared to the men, I have to acknowledge it was a different America during the Great War. The role of women was evolving. Indeed, the war and the outbreak of a deadly flu were catalysts to change. And despite these factors, the Secretary of the War, Newton Baker, was adamant in his refusal to create the soldier version of the yeomanette. Despite continuous requests from field commanders, he stood firm. General Pershing asked for 100 women switchboard operators in uniform. He received contracted support. Finally, the Secretary relented and allowed command stateside to hire civilian women to perform clerical work in U.S. domestic camps. Afraid of their impact on the soldiers, the regulations said the women had to have careful supervision and must be of mature age and high moral character. Regardless of these additional restrictions, I've now no doubt these women of high moral character served with joy and bravely sang their songs. They were helping win the war. The ceasefire and armistice was declared on 11 November 2018. Colonel McRae had managed to survive a few more years after the creation of his poem, dying in January 1918. He did not live to see the war end and the peace begin. He died while the fight was still on. By 1918, the poppies in the fields were seen by the thousands of American women who volunteered to serve overseas. many of them singing so bravely that they received the French Croix de Guerre as recognition. And John McCrae's poem was published and well known at that point. And perhaps as a foreshadow of his own mortality, he reminds us in the final stanzas, "Take up your quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields." McCrae lived long enough to know that the torch was also carried by the women of World War I. They held the torch high and kept faith with both mankind and womankind. If the dead sleep peacefully, it is because the women, the larks, sang bravely. The lark's song has been muted by the passing of a time over 100 years, and we are here today to remember their contributions and pray that they too sleep undisturbed as the poppies grow. I have wondered about that masculine voice and perspective of Dr. McCrae and why it was not matched by a nurse or women volunteer who saw the poppies bloom between crosses from Belgium to Serbia. They were not passive observers. Their lives were bursting full of task as they fulfilled their various roles in support of the war. I think these women were busy. They had no time to record their thoughts on the guns of war and friends lost. I felt I could best bestow an honor on the women of World War I by giving them a voice. In response to Colonel McCrae's heartfelt poem of loss and duty, I provide to you a poem for the women who tended to others in the Great War. We tend the fields. We tend the fields. We watch the harvest. We stand in grace near rows of scarlet. Ours is to hold the hand of boys, listen to past sorrows and joys, and whispers of regret as their last solace. We leave the dead to raise the living, mourn the men we nursed, held and buried, left lying in fields we tended with all our being. We'll think our lives were at the hardest, tending fields through guns of August. We'll learn poppies bloom unattended, but heart scarred cannot be mended. When life feels normal, our grief is sharpest, as we are left to tend the fields. Thank you for coming today to help us commemorate the women of World War I. May God bless all of us and all those who bravely sing.
Thank you to Admiral Howard. That was absolutely profound. It's important for us to remember that the future National World War I Memorial that honors the men and the women who answered the call to serve their nation in the Great War. The Commission wants you to know that you all have the opportunity and responsibility, we all do, to ensure that with our support, the memorial soon becomes a reality. And now, to recognize the service of women from across the nation, we have some very special women who are trailblazers in their own right with us here today to lay the wreaths for each of their respective services. It's my honor to introduce them to you. Please stand as your name is called. For the Army, Sergeant First Class Jasmine Joyner. For the Marine Corps, Rhonda Amtower, President of the Women's Marine Association. For the Navy, Lieutenant Commander Alexa Jenkins, President of the Sea Service Leadership Association. For the Air Force, Brigadier General Wilma Vaught, who also blazed many trails. General Vaught was the force behind the creation of the Women in Military Service for America Memorial and is President Emeritus of the Board of Directors of the Memorials Foundation. And for the Coast Guard, Captain Lucinda Cunningham. And Captain Cunningham was the first African-American Coast Guard woman to ever reach the rank of captain. The wreath laying symbolizes our continued remembrance and honor of the sacrifice and service of women in our nation's military, from the earliest days when they served disguised as men until today. So to conclude this program, we're going to have a wreath laying, which is going to happen outside. And when the last wreath is placed, we will observe a brief moment of silence to remember the brave service of all the women we honor. The Commission thanks each and every one of you for joining us today, for your support of our nation, and for your support of the National World War I Memorial. So there are some folks near the rear doors who will guide you outside if you'd like to follow them out now for the wreath laying.